Thank you for attending the session, Is There a Right Way to Teach Reading? Improving Reading Proficiency for Students with Disabilities. Disability Rights Florida advocates, educates, investigates, and litigates to protect and advance the rights, dignity, equal opportunities, self-determination, and choices for all people with disabilities. Disability Rights Florida gets funding, responsibility, and authority under 9 federal programs to protect the rights of Floridians with disabilities. We are a not-for-profit corporation since 1987. We have offices in Tallahassee, Tampa, Gainesville, and Hollywood. We also have satellite offices in multiple other communities. My name is Wendy West. I have a Juris Doctorate, a Master's in Education Law, a Bachelor's of Science in Elementary Education, and an Associate's of Arts in Journalism. I'm licensed to practice law in Florida and admitted to all courts, both federal and state, within Florida, including the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. I represent clients at administrative hearings through the Division of Administrative Hearings. I am the mother of a special needs child and have been a staff attorney with Disability Rights Florida since 2017. Prior to becoming an attorney, I was an educator. As a teacher, my expertise is in literacy skills development. Having worked in Florida schools as a language arts and intensive reading instructor, I'm able to interpret reading evaluations, design targeted interventions based on the data, create progress monitoring plans, and incorporate it all within the IEP. A sobering reality. On average, only 30% of Florida's 12th grade students are graduating as proficient readers. The national average is 37%, so we're slightly below the national average. By 3rd grade, all subject matters require proficient reading comprehension skills. Since 1992, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, has monitored the nation's proficiency in the domains of early literacy and math. This is commonly known as the nation's report card. NAEP found that 83% of students from low-income families, which is 6.6 million children, do not meet NAEP's proficient reading level by the end of 3rd grade. 71% of students with disabilities score below basic reading proficiency by the end of 3rd grade. And a little background on the scores. The scores are broken into 4 categories from the lowest to the highest: below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. So 71% of students with disabilities score in the very lowest category, which is below basic reading proficiency, by the end of 3rd grade. There's no excuse for this. The National Institute of Health indicates that nearly all children have the cognitive capacity to learn to read, estimating that only 5% of young readers have significant cognitive impairments that would make acquiring reading skills extremely difficult. And I caution you to not confuse significant cognitive impairments with intellectual functioning. There are individuals who have intellectual disabilities but are not considered to have significant cognitive impairments. Only approximately 1% of special needs students in Florida have a significant cognitive impairment. Reading is science. This is also known as the science of reading. The International Literacy Association refers to the science of reading as a specific set of research insights on how reading develops, why students struggle, and which interventions are successful. So first, we need to determine what makes a reader proficient. In order to make that determination, first we must understand the cognitive developmental processes involved in learning to read, and then we must identify how pitfalls in our current educational approaches may relate to why learners are failing. The cognitive developmental process involved in learning to read. It may surprise you, but the human brain is not genetically wired to read or write. Learning how to read requires the creation of a new interface between your vision system in your brain and your spoken language system. Our brains have to learn to speak, then recognize, learn, and understand the complex symbol and letter system of our language. When we learn to read, we are rewiring and building new connections between different parts of our brain. Skilled reading is a combination of letter-word recognition, fluency, language comprehension, and reading comprehension. Phonemic awareness and phonics requires skilled readers to identify that letters have corresponding sounds, blend those sounds together to make words, and break words into smaller parts. Specifically, this is the skill associated with phonemes, which is single speech sounds, with letters or graphemes, the written units corresponding to phonemes, such as a single letter or a combination of letters. Skilled readers must be able to use those decoding skills to be able to read fluently. Fluently means with speed and accuracy and with expression. Even when a reader becomes fluent, if the vocabulary comprehension piece is missing, the fluent reader will not comprehend what is being read. It is simply a bunch of words on a page with no meaning or deeper understanding. Language comprehension. Language comprehension is made up of 5 interrelated components. Background knowledge, which is the facts and concepts and experience the reader brings to the table. Vocabulary, which includes academic, non-academic, word meanings and word relationships. Language structures, which is syntax, semantics, Latin roots, and Greek combining forms. Verbal reasoning, which involves inferencing, figurative language, problem solving using words. And literacy knowledge, which is the understanding of print concepts, genres, titles, subtitles, heading, parts of a book, etc. Reading comprehension. Think of reading comprehension as an equation. Phonemic awareness plus phonics plus language comprehension equals reading comprehension. If there are any variables missing in this equation, you will not be a skilled reader. Learning to read involves visual and language systems, sound, processing speed, working memory, and attention. Reading is a multisensory affair, and each region of the brain plays a role. Impediments to skilled reading. Students who do not become proficient or skilled readers struggle to access their grade level standards, curriculum, or instruction. Students do not become proficient readers for a plethora of reasons. Poverty, they speak a different language, disability, educational neglect. Despite the impediments, most students have the ability to learn to read proficiently. For students with disabilities, the curriculum and instructional modalities must be addressed by the IEP or 504 team. Curriculum and instruction. The child's IEP must include a statement of the special education and related services and supplementary aids and services based on peer-reviewed research to the extent practicable to be provided to the child. And this is the section of the federal law governing special education, also known as IDEA. An overriding theme of the IDEA is that it requires the use of scientifically based instructional practices. Peer-reviewed research is one such scientifically based practice. Ultimately, the IEP team has the final say about what curriculum and instructional modalities will be required to provide the student with FAPE. IDEA is clear that whatever is used must be peer-reviewed as effective for this population to the extent practicable. Peer-reviewed research, the definition. Peer-reviewed research refers to research that is reviewed by qualified and independent reviewers to ensure that the quality of the information meets the standards of the field before the research is published. The Department of Education stated further that reducing the term to a single definition is difficult because the review process varies depending on the type of information to be reviewed. And this comes from the Federal Register. Peer-reviewed research generally refers to research that is reviewed by qualified and independent reviewers to ensure that the quality of information meets standards of the field before the research is published. Determining whether a particular early intervention service is based on peer-reviewed research may require a review of literature or of other information that reports on the use of evidence-based practices by peer providers. And this information was provided by letter to Kane. It's an OSEP letter. To the extent practicable. The phrase "to the extent practicable," as used in IDEA, generally means that services and support should be based on peer-reviewed research to the extent that it is possible, given the availability of peer-reviewed research. So the takeaway from this is, if it isn't practicable, districts can use something else. The peer-reviewed studies do not necessarily have to show the services and supports were peer-reviewed as effective for the population of students with the child's unique combination of disabilities. And ultimately, the program has to be sufficient to show it provides the student with faith. So how this comes into play with reading instruction for a student with an IEP is whatever the IEP team determines is appropriate for this student in their specialized reading instruction. It must be, to the extent practicable, scientifically based. And not only must it be scientifically based, IDEA takes it a step further and tells us what scientific evidence we need to reach, which is peer-reviewed research, to the extent practicable. Where can you find peer-reviewed research? Well, I usually go to What Works Clearinghouse. This database is a bit clunky and sometimes hard to use, but it's my go-to for research and peer-reviewed studies in the field of education. It is a database, and you can go in and start clicking what particular age group, what particular disability, and start looking at the different reading programs that have been peer-reviewed as effective for that particular grade level, for that particular type of reading disability. You can also go to something called Student Achievement Partners. SAP is a nonprofit dedicated to improving literacy and mathematics outcomes for K-12 students nationally. And the Academics Interventions Tool Chart. This has 6 tool charts intended to assist educators and families in becoming informed consumers who can select academic and behavioral assessment tools and interventions. There are 3 types of reading disabilities for the most part. These 3 types of developmental reading disabilities are those with phonological deficits, implicating a core problem in the phonological processing system of oral language, those with processing speed, orthographic processing deficits, affecting speed and accuracy of printed word recognition, also known as RAN or fluency problems. And then we have comprehension deficits, specifically found in children with social linguistic disabilities, for example, autism spectrum, vocabulary weaknesses, generalized language learning disorders, and learning difficulties that affect abstract reasoning and logical thinking. But it's important to note that these 3 kinds of developmental disabilities often overlap. So a phonological deficit implicating a core problem in the phonological processing system of oral language is something we typically see in children with dyslexia, which is a type of a reading disability. Then we also have processing speed and orthographic processing deficits. We can see that in children with dysgraphia, dyslexia. We can see that in children with autism, comprehension deficits. We usually see that in children with autism or other developmental disabilities. But it's important to note you can have an individual with a reading disability that is affected by all three types of reading disabilities. What works? Finding what works for students is an individualized approach. However, there are some universal best practices that have been long recognized as effective for struggling readers. First, whatever it is you use, it needs to be direct, explicit, and multisensory instruction. That means those are kind of terms of art, but direct and explicit means it is teacher-led and it explains everything to the student. It's not typically something that can be done in computer-based learning, although a teacher can zoom in with a student and provide direct, explicit instruction with a live Zoom session. Multi-sensory instruction means it appeals to all the senses. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can smell it, you can manipulate it. Curriculum that is systematic, has built-in progress monitoring, is differentiated, and covers all 5 foundational reading skills in the proper scope and sequence. So in curriculum that is systematic, each skill builds on the next, and it meets all those other criteria. And the reading skills in the proper scope and sequence are as follows: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Identifying which type of reading disability the student has and tailoring the goals and objectives to their specific needs. So first, when we have students with reading disabilities, we need to determine what type of reading disability they have, right? The phonological processing, the orthographical processing, or the language comprehension-based reading disabilities. We need to make sure that whatever curriculum we use and the instructional methodologies that are being used are peer-reviewed as effective for that population and grade level, and that it is direct, explicit, multisensory, systematic, has built-in progress monitoring, and covers all 5 foundational reading skills in the proper scope and sequence. Evaluations. In order to determine what the student's strengths and weaknesses are, evaluations are necessary. Understanding what type of data you need to capture in order to make informed decisions is vital. Remember, students with developmental reading disabilities often have co-occurring issues that affect their ability to access their curriculum and instruction, retain the information that they have learned, and retrieve the information when necessary. Make sure you are evaluating for all these issues as well. Co-occurring issues. Speech-language pathologists. The following skill areas may need to be assessed by speech-language pathologists. Speech sound errors and skills. Is the student using any phonological processes in his speech? Phonological awareness skills. How does the student do with phonological awareness tasks like rhyming, segmenting, blending, etc.? Overall language skills. How does the student score on expressive and receptive language tests? Co-occurring issues with an occupational therapist. The following skills may need to be assessed by an occupational therapist: oculomotor function or visual efficiency, visual perception skills development, visual discrimination to improve a child's ability to classify objects based on colors, forms, shapes, and other attributes, visual memory to improve the ability to recall information such as shapes, patterns, the sequence of events once it has been removed from sight, Spatial awareness, to teach how an object is placed in relation to oneself in space. Students with poor visual perceptual skills often are observed making clumsy movements or bumping into things. The following skills may need to be assessed by an occupational therapist. Ocular motor function or visual efficiency. Visual perception skill development. So eye-hand coordination is a vital skill required for reading and handwriting. The eyes need to guide the hand in drawing straight and curved lines precisely. Without proper eye-hand coordination, students struggle to keep track of where they were reading, writing, or copying from the board. Motor coordination, handwriting skills development. Has a student ever been assessed for visual function by a good developmental optometrist or ophthalmologist? I often hear when I start to mention ocular motor functions in IEP meetings, oftentimes I'll hear, well, that's a medical issue. That's not educationally related. Well, that's not true. Anytime something affects someone educationally, it is educationally related. So if the student has ocular motor issues and that is affecting their eye-hand coordination, then that will absolutely affect their education and should be addressed in the IEP. How do we know if we're having those issues? We evaluate for them. Executive functioning. This is another area where OTs can be very helpful. Oftentimes we see students with reading and learning disabilities have poor executive functioning. These include organizational skills development, teaching how to think in reverse to find a solution to a task, breaking a large task into smaller ones. Not only does it become more manageable, but it also reduces anxiety. Teaching how to prepare physically and mentally for a task in advance. A visual timetable for the week is perfect for planning ahead. Planning early reduces anxiety and last-moment time pressure and helps in achieving better results in the task. Using visual cues for recalling work to be done, such as to-do lists, are very helpful in keeping track. These are all executive functioning skills that can be taught to the individual with a disability, but first they need to be evaluated to determine if it's a needed area, and if so, we need to write goals and objectives that target this, and the occupational therapist is typically the ones that work on executive functioning skills. It can also be worked on in the classroom, but an occupational therapist kind of specializes in this. Academic assessment areas. So we're looking, we've covered what the speech language therapist needs to look at, what the occupational therapist needs to look at for evaluative purposes. Academic areas need to be assessed as well. So we need to look at phonological awareness. So that's an individual's awareness of and access to sound structure of his or her oral language. Phonological or language-based memory. That is the ability to recall sounds, syllables, and words. Rapid automatic naming, which is also referred to as RAN, is the speed of naming objects, colors, digits, or letters. Receptive vocabulary, that's the understanding of words heard. Phonics skills, which is understanding of the symbol letter to the sounds relationship, either individually or in combination with other letters. Decoding, which is the ability to use symbol-sound association to identify, read, pronounce words, real words, and nonsense words. Oral reading fluency, the ability to read accurately at a storytelling pace to facilitate support comprehension at the sentence level and at the paragraph level. Spelling, also known as encoding. Writing at the sentence level and the paragraph level. These are all areas that should be assessed when we're evaluating a child with a disability for a learning disability, specifically a reading disability. Thank you so much for joining this session. I hope you got a lot out of it. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you guys this year. Next year I'm going to be there. Right now, we have our public input planning survey at Disability Rights Florida, and we would love your input. This really helps us in developing our goals and priorities and objectives for the upcoming year. And the link is located right here at the bottom of the page. If you have any questions or you are seeking advocacy in the areas of education, with vocational rehabilitation, community-based supports and services, and institutional settings, access to your community, we have folks that work in all of these areas at Disability Rights. You just need to contact us or go to our website and complete an online intake and request advocacy. Thank you so much. Have a great day.